Tired of the endless cycle? Watching porn, masturbating, feeling guilty, then watching porn again. Powerofpurity.org.
Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back. Tony here. I'm glad you could join us for this episode. And if you've been listening, you know that I've been sharing my story, and I'm going to continue to do that today. And I've shared several stories leading us up to this point. Story 1 was my family of origin. Story 2 was magazines and books. Story 3 was taking the risk to peak. Story 4, hurting my body, was about the discovery of masturbation. Story 5, ungodly role models. Story 6 was sexual abuse, and that brings me today to story number 7. And for lack of a better title, I'm just calling this optional stories, because the fact is I really have several stories that I could tell here, and I'm probably just going to tell one on myself. It's a story that I'm pretty embarrassed and ashamed of, and really quite horrified, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. As I've been going through my story, you might notice that what I've shared so far concerns mostly things that have happened to me, right? Living in a wounded, broken, and fallen world. My family of origin, the way my mom and dad were, the way my family was growing up, the discovery of pornography, the discovery of masturbation, and then the influence of ungodly role models, some senior male role models in my life and the way that affected me, and then being sexually abused by 2 older women. These are all very sad and difficult things that happened to me during my childhood and adolescence. In the metaphor of the cake mix that I shared, you can see the bad ingredients that are getting mixed into the cake mix of Tony, right? The development of my sexual self. I shared the metaphor: if there was an enemy who wanted to come in and sabotage the cake and perpetrate harm and destruction, he puts rat poison and lawn fertilizer and urine and gasoline in the cake mix. It would ruin the cake mix. Well, it's as if God intended for me to become a particular young man, and including my sexuality, that I would be a man of purity and a man of holiness and a man of God, and that my sexual self would develop in an appropriate, healthy way. But here's all these unhealthy, unholy, terrible ingredients getting kind of put into the cake mix, getting mixed in there from the very beginning. In the metaphor of the rocket ship, this stuff is bumping me off course, off trajectory, the sexual trajectory that God intended for my life, you see. But the fact of the matter is that the brokenness in our life isn't always just about bad things that happen to us, but it also concerns the people that we become as a result, the person that we become. And the fact of the matter is, my problem with sex isn't just rooted in bad things that happen to me, but it also concerns, in reality, the person that I was becoming as a result on the inside of me, who I was, my heart, you see. And the fact is that I was becoming a very sexualized young man as a result of these exposures and experiences. And I believe that just the proclivity of my own natural flesh, my own heart, apart from God, would have a bent toward sexual sin and disorientation. I have this idea that the human heart is... the Bible says that the heart is deceitful above all things. The heart of man, apart from God, apart from God's love and influence, there's darkness and evil that can live in the heart of human beings. And imagine if you had a watermelon and you took a machete and you you whack that watermelon right in half, where you split it open, where you could see right into the inside of it. Well, imagine if you could do that with a human heart. If you could take the human heart, not the physical organ, but the deepest, truest part of a human being, their heart, if you could cut it open with a machete and look inside, I guess what I'm saying is that the Bible teaches us that there's sin inside the human heart, and that every human being has a proclivity or orientation toward certain kinds of sin. You know, kind of like if you took a 2x4 or 2x6, there's a grain in that wood, right? So if I gave you a 2x6 and I said I have an assignment, and what I want you to do is take the grain out of that piece of wood. Could you do that? Well, of course not. You could never take the grain out of a piece of wood because it's embedded in there. There's no way to get it out. And I think the Bible teaches that there's a grain of sin inside the human heart, a tendency, a proclivity. And I guess what I'm saying is that I just believe that for whatever reasons that the bent, the grain of sin, the orientation, the proclivity of the sinfulness of my own life has always been towards sexual sin. And I think there's some different reasons for that, some different things we'll talk about even as the podcast unfolds. But the point I'm getting to is, what I'm trying to say is that my problem with my sexual self wasn't just rooted in bad things that happened to me, but was actually rooted in the person that I was, in the depths of my heart and who I became. And that's really what I intend by this story 7. And I'm going to share a story 7, that I just call a photo of myself. And again, I'm very ashamed of this story. I'm very horrified by this story. And I'd rather not tell it, but in the interest of honesty and transparency and making my story known, I'm going to share this story. I don't know how old I am. I'm thinking I'm 13 or 14 years old. And about this time, I get a crush on a young lady at school. I'm attracted to this girl. I notice her. I like her. And of course, as an adolescent boy, I have no idea what to do. How do I approach her? How do I talk to her? What do I say to her? So I don't know what to do or how to let her know that I like her. And as a result, somehow it occurs to me, and this is the part that I look back and I'm just horrified. Do you know how you look back at certain things that you did in your life and you're horrified and you think, who was I? What was I thinking? How could I possibly do what I did? Well, for some reason, it must have come into my mind and my heart, into my frame of reference. I decided that what I was going to do is take a picture of my penis and give it to this girl. And so my mom and dad had this, these old instant Polaroid cameras. And so they would, you would take a picture with this camera and it would immediately spit out the bottom of the camera, the photograph, and it would expose itself with the light in 3, 4, 5 minutes, and the photo would appear on the film. And so I decided to take this picture with this Polaroid camera, and I guess I had the common sense to try to protect myself with some sense of anonymity, which tells me that I must have intuitively knew that this was wrong and I should not do this, and if I get caught, I'm going to get in trouble. So what I did is I got some blankets and I put it over the washer and dryer downstairs so there'd be a very neutral background that couldn't be identified. And I postured to take this picture of myself, and I guess doing this was kind of stimulating, erotic kind of experience for a young boy. So I remember that I was erect, and I take this photograph of myself. In this moment, I'm thinking of how common it is for kids to do this even today, this whole phenomena of sexting where Kids take pictures of themselves naked, take pictures of their genitals and send photographs to each other. It's something that's very common, and apparently it's something that I discovered way back when, even though it wasn't something that everybody was doing back then. So anyway, I have this picture now, and I have to try to get it to this girl, and I guess I knew I couldn't just walk up and give it to her. I didn't know for sure what to do. And so my plan was during recess, we'd have lunch break, and kids would be around talking in the hallway and this and that. And what I did is very incognito, I walked by her desk and I slipped this picture into her textbook so that nobody saw me put the picture in there, and nobody knew what I had done. And so class resumes the next hour, and I'm sitting across the classroom, and I can see her out of the corner of my eye, and I actually see the moment that she discovers this photograph. And she's looking in the book, and she turns the page, and here's this photograph. And I see her pick it up, and she looks at it, and I can immediately tell that she's like, I guess, shocked or horrified or surprised. And she does the last thing in the world that I ever expected her to do. She jumps up, she runs forward to the teacher's desk, and she shows this to the teacher. And everybody in the class is working on an assignment at this time, and I hear this scuttlebutt, this whispering back and forth, like this as her and the teacher are talking, and suddenly the teacher stands up and literally pounds his desk and says, "Attention, attention! I need everyone's attention. Something has happened here, and this is very inappropriate, and you know who did this, whoever did this, and a picture has been discovered, and this is very inappropriate. This picture should never have been put in this book, and I need to know who did this, who put this picture in this book, and whoever did this, you must come to me and talk to me immediately after class. I need to talk to you." And of course, I didn't say a word. I'm horrified. I can't believe that this is happening, and I never expected this to happen. And so I'm kind of shrinking down within myself, and I'm thinking, there is no way, dude. There's no way I'm going to confess that this is me, that I did this. I guess I knew I'm going to get in big trouble. I could tell by his reaction, and I already knew that I shouldn't be doing this. So, of course, I never said anything. I never went forward, and the fact is I never got caught. Nobody was able to prove that I did this. No one even accused me of doing it. And so I got away with the episode by the skin of my teeth, and I was always so thankful that I didn't get caught in that episode. But in retrospect, you guys, do you know what? I think this episode is incredibly sad about my life. It's a sad story. It's a terrible story, and I think it's a significant story for several different reasons. For one thing, I was always thankful that I never got caught, but in retrospect, I came to the place when I was in my own therapeutic process that I realized the best thing that could have ever happened to me is if I would have got caught in that episode, because it's as if I could have had a chance maybe to deal with some issues in my life that were going to follow me and cause a lot of problems in the years to come. It's as if, maybe somebody could have dealt with it like, holy cow, this kid has a problem. This is pretty weird that he would take a picture of himself and do this. So it's like, this kid needs help. Let's get this kid to counseling. Let's talk to this kid and let's find out what's going on with this kid. Why in the world would he do such a thing? And maybe I could have had an opportunity to have some therapeutic intervention in my life at that point that could have helped redirect the way that my sexual self was already being misaligned and so misguided, you see. It's just, it's terrible. And I wish that I would have been caught. And I think it's sad to think, why in the world would a 13 or 14-year-old boy even think to do such a thing? Why would it even be in his frame of reference? It's like this should have never happened. But in retrospect, as I talked about this with my own therapist, and I'm trying to understand my story, my own sexual story and history, and how I got to the place where I had a sexual addiction and sex had so much power in my life and soul, why sex was controlling me and I was not controlling sex for so many years. And in retrospect, I realize, even though it's a sad story and it's a tragic story, maybe it makes sense. Maybe the story makes sense, When you think about my story, when you think about a young boy's story and all the things that happened to him concerning his family of origin and the discovery of masturbation, the discovery and the power of pornography in a young boy's life, age 10, 11, 12, and then ungodly role models and being sexually abused, the entire orientation of my sexual self, the birth of my sexual self was shrouded in these dark, sad, terrible, ungodly, unholy circumstances and events. And maybe it's not so crazy what this 13 or 14-year-old boy would do by taking a picture of his penis, because it speaks of the orientation that was being embedded in my life already by that young age 13 and 14. This is what I was thinking, apparently, in my frame of reference, the way I was relating to sex, the way I was relating to my own penis, and the way that I was thinking that you project yourself to other people, the way you offer yourself to others in relationship. I was looking at pornography, and I see people taking pictures of themselves, naked pictures of themselves, of their genitals, and showing to each other. So I think it was literally within my frame of reference to do this. And I think it's a telling story. It's a significant story because it just it reveals the state, the condition of this young boy's heart and soul, and the power that sex is having over him already at such a young age. And I hate to say it, but it's true. The fact is that I could tell other stories here of things that I did during my adolescence, revolving around my sexual self, things that I would be embarrassed to say and ashamed to say. Among others, I'll just mention one other thing I had read in this book that my father had about these sexual exploits these people were having, and in some of the stories they would go skinny dipping and go pool hopping and go around in the neighborhood and get naked and get in different people's swimming pools at night and have sex. And I this was part of what I was exposed to, so I got in my brain to do this. And so I remember going around the neighborhood and skinny dipping and pool hopping all by myself. But again, this is just an example of the kind of thing that I was doing as my sexual self was being born, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, the things that were in my frame of reference, and the ways that I was beginning to express myself sexually. So you see now, guys, it isn't just the things that have happened to me that are bad and that are difficult, but in fact, it's the person that I'm becoming, the Tony that I am on the inside. If you split my heart open with a machete and you saw the grain of sin that's inside of me, this young man at a very young age has an orientation toward sexual mischief, sexual sin, sexual non-health, if you will. something was very, very wrong with me. I was off to a very, very bad start in the birth and development of my sexual self. What I'm going to do is fast forward to story number 8 now. I'm a little bit older, and I call this story my marriage disaster. And this concerns the meeting my wife, Sherry, and our courtship, and then getting married. And the fact of the matter is, when Sherry and I got married, our marriage was almost an instant disaster. And I want to tell you just a little bit about that. I met Sherry, and we dated for about 6 months, and then we got engaged. And we were engaged for 6 months, and then we got married. So we didn't know each other all that long by the time we got married. We got married on September 17th, 1983. And our marriage was an instant disaster, and I didn't know what was so wrong with us early on in our marriage. And the fact of the matter, at the epicenter of the crisis and the disaster of our marriage was the issue of sex. And although we didn't understand it at the time, we would eventually come to understand through our own therapeutic process that I was essentially a young man with a sexual addiction, and Sherry was a young woman with a sexual aversion when we got married. And if you can picture 2 trains on the same track going full steam straight toward one another, they would collide into one another, and there would be this epic crash, this epic explosion. And that's kind of a way that we came to see ourselves, just going full steam straight at each other, and our lives crashed into each other. And it was pretty much a disaster from day one. Well, you understand something of what I mean when I say that I was a young man with a sexual addiction. You've heard enough of my story at this point to see the dynamics that had been put into my life and the person I was becoming age 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, and how sexual addiction was born in my life, I think, at a very young age. And what I want to do now is take just a few minutes and share just a little bit with you some of my wife's story, Sherry's story. And before I do this, I want you to know that I do so with her permission. Sherry and I have been to hell and back in the context of our marriage. We've been married 32 years at the point, the day that I'm recording this podcast. And it's really a miracle that her and I are still together, because we did go to hell and back in our marriage, and sex was at the epicenter of our crisis. But anyway, we're a miracle. We're a miracle, and we've come to the place where we believe that God wants us to share our story with other people in the hope that our story might help others and inspire others and help others begin to understand their story and why they've struggled so long and so hard in their lives with some of the things they've struggled with. And that's what I meant when I said I hope our story is a kind of template for you to lay over your story, to invite you into your story as you hear our stories, and help you maybe begin to connect the dots and understand more of your own brokenness and understand how God wants to bring His healing and redemption to your own life. So I share Sherry's story with her permission. So just a few key facts about Sherry's story. Sherry's family of origin was very broken, was very dysfunctional, I should say, as every single family is. I said earlier in the podcast, I believe every family is dysfunctional, basically because the Bible says everybody is a sinner. And so what's normal? You know, it just looks different in every human life and every family, but every family has their issues. And there were certainly significant issues in Sherry's family of origin. And then when Sherry was 13 years old, she had her very first sexual experience, and she was raped at the age of 13 by a guy that was 18 years old. And if I told you nothing more of Sherry's story, that would be enough, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be enough to know that she was raped at the age of 13? Can you imagine how an event like this would affect a 13-year-old girl? The way it would affect her sense of herself, her sense of femininity, her sense of her own sexuality, her ability to trust men, and her understanding of what sex is and the way sex works between a guy and a gal, and just all these profoundly horrible consequences that were perpetrated upon her through this event. She was raped at the age of 13. And the way this happened, Sherry was hanging out with some girls in the neighborhood. There was 4 or 5 of them. She was the youngest at 13. There was a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old and a couple 16-year-olds. Well, the 16-year-olds could drive, and one of these 16-year-old girls had a boyfriend who lived in Illinois. And, of course, we grew up in the St. Louis area in Missouri. And so this 16-year-old girl wanted to go see her boyfriend, so she'd get the car. And can you imagine this carload of girls from the neighborhood? They all pile in the car, and they drive over to Illinois so this girl can go see her boyfriend. So here's Sherry, a little 13-year-old girl, going to another state, and her mother doesn't know she's going to another state. So this carload of girls pulls up to this house, and they all go in. Mom and Dad aren't home, and sure enough, there's a bunch of guys in this house. So in a short matter of time, basically this 18-year-old guy takes this 13-year-old girl, and he pulls her in a bedroom in this house, and he does this thing. He perpetrates himself upon her. He rapes her. You see, it wasn't a forcible rape in the sense that she was kicking and screaming, "No, no, no, don't touch me." It wasn't like that. In fact, she really was so naive. She essentially didn't understand what was happening to her and what he was doing to her. In fact, she was so naive that she later asked one of the older girls, "What is a virgin?" Because during the event itself, he asked her, "Are you a virgin?" And she didn't know what that was. It shows how naive she was. And by the way, I've contemplated that fact quite a bit, and I've come to a conclusion. And I might ask you, why do you think he asked her, "Are you a virgin?" during that event? And I've come to believe, I think he did that essentially because he wanted to know that he was taking this little girl's virginity, because it had to do with conquest, in other words. It had to do with power and control. He wanted to see this as a conquest and to know that he was taking this little girl's virginity. And, of course, that's our understanding of rape, that rape is not a sexual event as much as it is a power event and a control event, a perpetration of violence, power, if you will. So he does this thing to this little 13-year-old girl. She doesn't really understand what happens to her. And you would think that as a result of this experience, it would push Sherry the other way, and that she would resist against sex, and she would want nothing to do with sex as a result of this event. But in fact, it had the very opposite effect to her, and it actually invited her into the world of promiscuity. You see, at this time, this carload of girls from the neighborhood that she's hanging out with, they all have boyfriends, and the fact is they're all being sexual with their boyfriends. And so Sherry kind of learns from her peer group, this is what you do if you want a boyfriend. And she's like every other true blue, red-blooded American girl. She wants a boyfriend, right? She has longings in her heart that are pure and that are justified and understandable. Will a boy love me? Will a boy want me? Will a boy think I'm pretty? Will a boy want to hold my hand? Will somebody want to be my boyfriend? Will a boy want to kiss me? So she wants a boyfriend, just like all the other girls want a boyfriend. And she's watching these girls, and what's being modeled to her is that when you get a boyfriend, you're sexual. You have sex with this boy. And so she begins to do what these other girls are doing, what's being modeled to her, in the same way I suggested in my story, ungodly role models. You see, we learn how to think about sex and how to talk about sex and what to do in sex, how to be sexual, from those around us who are teaching us, and we're watching them and observing and we're learning. So Sherry is invited into a world of promiscuity. And basically from the age of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, she begins to date guys, and she's looking for a boyfriend, right? And what do you think the guys are looking for? The guys want to get in her pants. That's what the guys want to do. And so guy after guy begin to take advantage of her sexually, and she's kind of disoriented in this. In the verbiage of the old song, how does it go? Looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. You see, Sherry was looking for love, and the guys are looking for sex. And so she's taken advantage of through these adolescent years. And at the age of 17, Sherry gets pregnant, and she's horrified. She doesn't want to have a baby. So she quickly sneaks and she gets an abortion. Her mother and father never even find out about the pregnancy. And she then reports by the time she's 18 and 19 years old, she's basically depressed all the time. Sherry reports later that she remembers crying all day long, crying sometimes for 2 or 3 days at a time. She would just cry, and she didn't know why she was crying. All she knew was that she hated herself. She didn't like herself. She felt disgusting. She felt yucky. And she intuitively knew, these boys don't love me. My boyfriend doesn't love me. He just wants to use me for sex. And so sex begins to make her feel dirty. Sex makes her feel used. Sex makes her feel yucky, you see. And although she doesn't understand what's going on in her life, she decides to try to kill herself. So at the age of 18 and then again at the age of 19, she tries to commit suicide 2 different times. Thankfully, both of these attempts are rather lame attempts, and they're unsuccessful, thanks be to God. And she's a very deeply troubled young lady, obviously. And then I meet this young lady when she's 21 years old, just a couple years after this. And when I meet her, she is a beautiful young lady. I can see her outside, you see, and she looks like a beautiful young woman. She is a beautiful young woman. She's still a beautiful woman. I think she's unbelievably beautiful, always has been. And so I'm attracted to her. I think, man, she's awesome. This is great. I love this girl. She's a beautiful girl. We get into this relationship, and unfortunately, we become sexual before marriage. I begin to treat her like the other guys had treated her. But we decide at some point that we're going to go ahead and we're going to get married. And so we move toward our marriage. And this is when we come to the marriage disaster. And I believe I need to close this podcast at this point. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you can join me in the next episode, and I'm going to continue this story. God bless you. I'm glad you could be here, and have an awesome day.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.